What's up, YouTube? I am the Vanilla Nerd, and today I want to talk about the Fantastic Four and how it's going to kind of affect the larger MCU. You can kind of think about this as my extra thoughts on the movie outside of my main review, but we'll get into more of what this video is about in a second. Quickly, though, I do want to give a spoiler warning. I will be spoiling this movie from start to finish, as well as like the general state of the MCU. So if you aren't caught up on that, well, now's your chance to get out. But yeah, just kind of talking about the MCU, talking about Avengers 5 and 6 and their titles being Doomsday and Secret Wars and what we can infer from that and some things surrounding that. So again, if you haven't seen this movie, if you aren't caught up with the MCU, then yeah, now's a good time to get out. Okay, so as I was reviewing the Fantastic Four, I quickly realized that I had more thoughts than I wanted to fit into one video, so I decided to make a second video, and the theme of the topics I'm going to be talking about here is all the ways that this movie will affect the wider MCU, which is exciting. So let's start with talking about the characters' superpowers, because in all reality, all of the characters have expanded superpowers than the ones they typically are shown to have in the comics. Notably, Ben can grow a beard now, Johnny can suck up the flames from a building, effectively putting the fire out. Sue can make only parts of her body invisible to show off like her baby, for instance. And notably, Mr. Fantastic has nothing new or cool added to him because the creators of this movie didn't care about his stretching ability. It still bothers me. I still want to rant about it, but I already did once, so I'm not going to do it again in this video. Just still going to say it's frustrating. But regardless, the point is that they all have a little bit more superpowers, a little bit more control over their powers, and a lot of times they do this in normal clothes, which is kind of cool because typically a big plot point for the characters, both in previous movies and in the comics, is that they can only really use their powers in conjunction with their clothes if they're wearing their supersuits. You know, the supersuits use this pseudoscience called unstable molecules that allows them to work with the unstableness of their powers. Which, you know, again, pseudoscience, but I get it. It's when they're wearing their supersuits, their powers work with them, and when they're not wearing their supersuits, it doesn't work that way, right? Right. And this is a fun little limitation to give to the Fantastic Four because it provides for some unique conflict in their lives when a crisis breaks out while they're in their normal clothes and they're just like, oh, what are we going to do? How can I use my powers without, you know, my super suit that can work with my powers better? And that's fun. And, you know, other characters like Superman and Spider-Man just wear their suits underneath their everyday clothes. But I like that the Fantastic Four had more control over their powers to where it didn't matter what clothes they were wearing, especially since in previous movies, this kind of conflict was only ever used to provide some cheap laughs and gratuitous nudity on behalf of Johnny and Sue Storm, which is something I can honestly live without. Plus, an easy explanation would be that Reed Richards just made everyday normal clothes using his unstable molecule formula, so all of their clothes are able to interact with the unstable molecules, and that just makes sense. You know, Johnny absolutely feels like the kind of guy that's like, hey man, I want to use my powers, but I still want to look cool and like a normal person. And they would allow that to happen. And Reed would be happy to comply and make him, you know, some suits. I don't know. He didn't make the spacesuits though that Johnny wanted, so it's dubious. It's dubious. Ultimately, I don't think it really matters. I don't think it really affects this story or any future stories, but it is an interesting thing to talk about. Of bigger note to me personally is the fact that Johnny was able to fly a little girl to safety without burning her. It shows an incredible amount of control over his powers, and it's something that was previously a limitation for Johnny Storm, you know? Yes, he can fly, but he can't really carry anyone else with him. He can't really stop or save a lot of things because he's liable to burn them up, which can be problematic and an interesting storytelling technique. However, I don't really think it's going to hurt the character that much. I don't really think it's going to stop any of the good stories that they can tell in future movies. Obviously, it didn't really have an effect on this movie, but it will be interesting to see how that affects future movies. Again, maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. I don't know. Go into the comments. Tell me, do you care that they have more control over their powers? Not just Johnny, but all of the Fantastic Four? Or is it something that you don't really care about and you thought it was just cool? I definitely lean towards I think it's just cool, but I think it is interesting to talk about and it's interesting to note for this version of the Fantastic Four. But moving on from the superpowers, let's talk about two nitpicks I have with this film that I didn't get to discuss in my review. One is with the teleporter. It has two platforms in the lab. There's one platform to teleport the egg away, and they build that platform up, or mini versions of that, all around the globe. And then there's another platform that helps rematerialize the egg. It definitely helps in that process. They show it, but we don't need a second platform all the way across the galaxy to help teleport the Earth, or we don't need a second platform to eventually teleport Galactus all the way across around the galaxy. It's just a little weird to me. Again, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't ruin the film for me or anything, but I do wish there was a little bit more internal consistency with how they showed the science of the teleportation. Not the end of the world. The other small nitpick I have is with Sue's hair, the fact that they made it platinum blonde, a very modern hairstyle and not something that's typically seen in the 1960s. And I get that this whole movie is trying to be an anachronism and have, 60s, but also futuristic. I think that works really well for the technology, for the look and feel of the architecture and the cars and everything. But, why did they give her this very modern hairstyle? It just doesn't make any sense, especially since you could say that maybe she's a trendsetter, maybe she's showing off a new hairstyle that the rest of the world should follow suit, but no one else in the movie has platinum blonde hair, only her. And it's a really small thing. It doesn't ruin the movie in any stretch of the imagination. Still, Sue is still my favorite character, but I am frustrated that they didn't give her a 60s hairstyle that'd be more appropriate to her character. I feel like that would have just made it better all the way around. Again, not the end of the world. It's still a great movie, but it is just something that gets under my skin as a little nitpick that I take issue with. So now I want to talk about how the Fantastic Four affects the wider MCU and what effect the wider MCU had on this movie in both ways. So basically, the first thing is, I really wish the Fantastic Four First Steps, that this movie, shot for shot, was the second movie in a Fantastic Four trilogy of sorts. Or maybe they make 4 movies. I don't know. Who cares? The point is that I wish this was the second film the Fantastic Four appeared in, because it really felt like they just jumped straight to world-ending threat with Galactus, and we didn't have time to really sit with these characters and experience a smaller scale threat with the Fantastic Four. I really would have appreciated if we had a proper origin story movie and they fought one of their more earthbound villains like the Red Wizard or Mole Man, and that they had a powerful story there. I understand why they jumped to Galactus, but it still bothers me. So, why did they jump to Galactus? Well, because they're trying to get the Fantastic Four ready for Avengers 5 and 6. And I'll get into that more in a second. I want to acknowledge that I know 2 other origin stories were told for the Fantastic Four in 2 other failed movie franchises, and I get that. And clearly, they were trying to be like Spider-Man Homecoming, where they just gloss over Spider-Man's backstory, because there have already been 2 other successful retellings of his origin in the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield films. And they did a similar thing with Superman 2025, where they gloss over his origin story, because on top of the multitude of movies that have shown that origin story, his origin story is also just so famous, and there have been so many parodies of it, that I think everyone knows it at this point, which is fine. And so having these characters already be established does a lot for your story, allows you to tell a more complex and compelling story, and works for this movie, absolutely. But it does frustrate me because the previous 2 versions of their origin that we've seen on screen were not faithful to the comics. In the comics, they go up in a spaceship and get hit by a storm. In those 2 movies, one of them they go to a different dimension, one of them they're in a space station hovering above Earth. Neither of those are a spaceship. And this movie hinted at the spaceship, and it just bothers me that we didn't get a more proper origin story for the characters. I think that would have been better. I think that would have been cooler. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. And it's still a good movie. I can't emphasize that enough. Fantastic Four is still a good movie, despite these issues I have with it. So, as much as I wish we had a first movie to set their origin and have them face a smaller scale villain, I'm fine that they jump straight to Galactus. The story is compelling. They do a good job convincing me that these characters are used to their superpowers, are used to being superheroes and celebrities and stuff. So, it works out great. I'm fine with it. Ultimately, in my opinion, this movie is best viewed with the understanding that the MCU as a whole is in crisis mode. Now, it's not necessary, but I do think it helps understand why this movie was made the way it was. Because ultimately, the MCU in the last 4 or 5 years has done its best to kind of tarnish its reputation, which is unfortunate. I mean, I don't think they did it purposefully, but they released a lot of projects that didn't have a whole lot of focus and weren't the highest quality, which is really frustrating to us fans of the original 3 phases. Don't get me wrong, those 3 phases had their issues. They were not perfect movies or projects or anything by any stretch of the imagination. And if you look at the behind the scenes for Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, it was very clear that the writers and creators of those shows did a lot of work to tie a lot of loose ends together, and the MCU isn't as focused as it was, but that's beside the point. The point is that they did try and it did work. Whereas with phases 4, 5, and 6, they really have not tried to tie it all together, and it shows, and it's painful, and it's frustrating. And hence, they're trying to promote quality over quantity now, so they've released a really good Thunderbolts movie, in my opinion, and now they've released a really good Fantastic Four First Steps movie in an attempt to tie things together, because they need the Fantastic Four to tell a compelling story in Avengers 4, 5, and 6. What are Avengers 5 and 6, you may be asking? Well, the first one's called Avengers Doomsday, and the second one's called Avengers Secret Wars. In both of those comic book titles that are affiliated with them, Doctor Doom is a big villain for the Avengers and for the Marvel Universe at large. So if you're gonna have Doctor Doom, it's kind of a necessity to have the Fantastic Four there to thwart him. So they needed to have an established Fantastic Four in order to fight the Doctor Doom that's going to show up in those 2 movies. And personally, that gets me excited. I'm glad that the MCU has decided we need Avengers films to bring people back. I am totally fine with that. And I'm glad that they kind of pushed the Fantastic Four up a little bit in terms of having them fight the Galactus, because it showed off, okay, they're ready to fight in a larger universe. They're ready to explore beyond their universe that they have set up right now. That gets me excited. And the Fantastic Four First Steps, as I've said multiple times, I think, is that it's a really good foundation for these characters. They can take them in so many places from this foundation. They got the team right to begin with, which means now we can see them show up in later and later films and grow and progress as characters, which is really, really exciting. And that's absolutely what's going to happen in Avengers 5 and 6. I think these characters, at least Mr. Fantastic, are going to take bigger roles in those movies and be some of the leads for those films to fight and thwart Doctor Doom, which is very exciting to me because these are Marvel's flagship characters. Like, I know we love Captain America and Iron Man and stuff, but those were B-list characters before the MCU made them big. The Fantastic Four were the OG, like, Marvel's flagship characters, and so to see them get on the big screen in a big way and very satisfying way is really exciting for a Marvel fan such as myself. The only real casualty of the Fantastic Four First Steps being this pre-established team and not a proper origin story and everything like that is that we're probably going to lose out on the retro-futuristic world that is theirs, that they've just beautifully built up and set up. Because ultimately, we know that at the end of Doomsday and Secret Wars, Avengers 5 and 6, that the multiverse saga is going to end. They're going to be done telling multiverse stories, or at least that's what they tell us. We'll see how true they keep to their word. But I do believe they're going to stop telling as many multiverse stories and try and tell more streamlined singular stories. I do believe it's going to work as a soft reboot for the MCU. And what that probably means is that the Fantastic Four are going to get pulled into the mainline story of the MCU with, you know, Tony Stark, Iron Man and the Avengers, Captain America, Steve Rogers, that we all know and love. And that's great, except for the fact that means we're probably not going to see this cool retro-futuristic world anymore. We're not going to have that technology out and about. Now, it's possible that in how they do the change and how they combine everything, that the Baxter building gets teleported, and so they still have that technology. It's possible that the Fantastic Four still insist on buying and creating technology that has that retrofuturistic look, but it is still going to exist in a world of the MCU, which is very much more modern, more looks like our normal everyday lives, which is fine, but it is sad because I am a real big fan of the setting of Earth 828 that Fantastic Four First Steps is set in. So the last big way that Fantastic Four First Steps is going to affect the wider MCU is through the introduction of Franklin Richards. He is very powerful. I mean, not only was he the MacGuffin of Galactus, a super powerful being in this movie, but also he brought Sue back to life as a baby, which is very, very impressive. And if you've read the comics, which I haven't really read many Franklin Richards comics, but that's beside the point. The point is, if you've read them, you know he's an absolute powerhouse. And so, how are you going to tell compelling stories with a character that can literally alter reality? I don't know. We'll see what they do. They already aged him up in the post-credit scene. He's like 5 years old in that scene. Does that mean he's going to be 5 in Avengers 5 and 6? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think it really matters what age he is. I think he's going to be a big part of that story. That's why they dropped that after credit scene. That's why they have Doctor Doom interacting with him so young. And I think it's very possible that Franklin ends up doing some sort of big sacrifice thing to save the multiverse. You know, he combines all the Earths together using his ultimate power. He dies in the process doing it, thereby allowing the Fantastic Four to continue being heroes, continue growing as characters, but they don't have this uber powerful baby at their disposal whenever a problem goes wrong. But I don't know. That's just my speculation. We'll see what happens in Avengers 5 and 6. So, in conclusion, this movie sets up a solid foundation for these characters going forward. It gives the characters greater control over their powers than ever before, and it sets these characters up to play a major role in Avengers 5 and 6. Not only the main Fantastic Four, but also their son, Franklin Richards, which is going to be exciting, and I'm looking forward to that in the future. I love the Fantastic Four First Steps. I love how it is a great jumping in point for the MCU because it's not really connected to the rest of the MCU, but it's going to have a major effect on the MCU. It is very exciting, and I just am excited for the MCU again, which is honestly very gratifying after so many years of not being excited about the MCU.